I'm Amanda, 35 years old, a real estate attorney in Boston who built my career from nothing. When my husband Richard called during my Chicago business trip, his words cut through me like ice. "I'm leaving you for Jessica. I've sold our house too. Good luck finding somewhere to live." Something in me stayed eerily calm as I simply replied, "All right." He didn't know what I knew. He had no idea what was waiting for him. Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment below and subscribe to hear how I turned my husband's betrayal into the sweetest victory. My story with Richard began 8 years ago at a charity gala for Boston Children's Hospital. I had worked my way up from a scholarship student to a promising attorney at Harrington and Wells, specializing in real estate law. That night, I wasn't planning to meet anyone special, just networking for potential clients while supporting a good cause. Richard Walker stood out immediately. Tall with piercing blue eyes and a smile that lit up the room, he moved through the crowd with natural confidence. He was the marketing director for a luxury watch brand, charismatic and ambitious. When he approached me with 2 glasses of champagne and a witty comment about the abstract art installation we were standing near, something just clicked. "You look like someone who appreciates clarity in a world of confusion," he said, nodding toward the chaotic painting while handing me a glass. I laughed genuinely for the first time that evening. Our conversation flowed effortlessly through the night. Richard had grown up in Connecticut, the son of a successful surgeon. He had that easy charm that comes from never worrying about money, yet he seemed genuinely interested in my journey, the first-generation college graduate who worked through school and fought for every opportunity. "There's something authentic about you, Amanda," he told me that night. "You're the real deal in a room full of pretenders." Our courtship was a whirlwind. Weekend trips to coastal Maine, surprise picnics in the public garden, and long conversations about our dreams. Within 6 months, he proposed during a sunset sailing trip on Boston Harbor. I said yes without hesitation. Looking back, perhaps I should have taken more time to really know him, but love has a way of rushing decisions. The first 4 years of marriage were as close to perfect as I could have imagined. We complemented each other well. My pragmatic nature balanced his spontaneity. We bought our first condo together, hosted dinner parties for friends, and traveled to Europe twice. Richard's career flourished. He became the national marketing director for his company, which came with a substantial raise and increasing prestige. That's when I started noticing subtle changes. The attentive man I married began bringing his work persona home, more concerned with appearances, name-dropping important connections, sharing less about his inner thoughts. His ego seemed to grow with each promotion. I tried to be supportive, assuming it was just a phase as he adjusted to new responsibilities. In our 5th year of marriage, Richard became obsessed with buying a historic Victorian home in Beacon Hill, one of Boston's most prestigious neighborhoods. The house was stunning, 3 stories with original woodwork, bay windows, and a small garden. At $2.4 million, it was stretching our budget considerably, even with our combined incomes. "This house makes a statement, Amanda," Richard insisted. "It tells the world we've arrived." As a real estate attorney, I approached the purchase with professional caution. I structured the deal carefully, insisting on certain legal protections that Richard dismissed as unnecessary paperwork. My professional experience had shown me how quickly dreams could turn into nightmares without proper safeguards. "Trust me," I told him, "these protections matter." I've seen too many cases where people lose everything because they didn't have the right documentation. Richard sighed dramatically while signing the papers. "All this legal mumbo-jumbo. I trust you, but this seems excessive." What he didn't realize was that I had created a specialized ownership structure, placing the house in a specific type of trust with conditions that would prove critically important later. Richard barely read the documents, scrawling his signature wherever I pointed. His carelessness about such an important investment should have been another warning sign. As we settled into our dream home, Richard's unexplained absences became more frequent. Late nights at the office turned into overnight business trips. When he was home, he was distracted, constantly checking his phone and taking calls in another room. The intimacy we once shared faded into polite coexistence. I tried everything to save our marriage. I suggested date nights, weekend getaways, even marriage counseling. Richard dismissed my concerns, telling me I was being insecure and that his career demands were temporary. Classic gaslighting, though I didn't recognize it at the time. "You're being paranoid, Amanda," he would say with practiced patience. "My job is demanding right now. Not everything is about you." The clues about his affair accumulated slowly. Unexplained credit card charges at restaurants we never visited together. A new cologne I hadn't purchased for him. The growing emotional distance and decreasing physical intimacy. I noticed it all but convinced myself I was overreacting. After all, we had built this life together. The beautiful house, our social circle, our shared dreams. Surely he wouldn't throw it all away. How wrong I was. My trip to Chicago came at a critical time for both my career and my marriage. Harrington and Wells had assigned me to close a major commercial real estate transaction, a $50 million deal that could lead to partnership if executed successfully. Under normal circumstances, I would have been thrilled by the opportunity, but with things so strained at home, my emotions were conflicted. "I'll only be gone for 3 days," I told Richard the night before my departure. He barely looked up from his laptop. "That's fine. I've got that charity event Thursday anyway," he replied without emotion. I stood there for a moment, waiting for more, perhaps a wish for good luck or a promise to miss me. When nothing came, I quietly packed my suitcase, adding my lucky navy blue suit that had seen me through every major professional victory. The flight to Chicago gave me time to focus and compartmentalize. Whatever was happening in my personal life would have to wait. This deal represented years of work and could secure my professional future regardless of what happened with Richard. Chicago welcomed me with unseasonably warm spring weather and a hotel suite overlooking Millennium Park. The negotiations were intense, 12 hours around a conference table with minimal breaks as we hammered out the details of the commercial development. My counterpart was a seasoned attorney known for aggressive tactics, but real estate law was my territory. I anticipated his objections before he raised them and had creative solutions ready. By the evening of the second day, we had reached an agreement that satisfied all parties. My clients were ecstatic, the opposing counsel was grudgingly respectful, and my firm would receive a substantial commission. As we signed the final papers, the lead developer leaned over to me. "Your reputation doesn't do you justice, Amanda." That was masterful. I returned to my hotel room exhausted but proud. After a quick shower, I ordered room service and opened my laptop to send a summary email to my managing partner. That's when my phone rang. Richard's name appeared on the screen. My first thought was concern. He rarely called when I was traveling. Perhaps something had happened at home. I answered quickly. "Richard? Is everything okay?" The coldness in his voice was immediate. "I'm calling to let you know I won't be at the house when you get back." "What do you mean? Where are you going?" I asked, still not comprehending what was coming. "I'm leaving you, Amanda. Jessica and I are getting married next month. I've already moved most of my things out." Jessica. The name hit me like a physical blow. His assistant. The young woman he had hired last year who often called our home looking for Richard on weekends for urgent work matters. Before I could respond, he continued, his voice detached as if reading from a script. "I've also sold the house. The new owners want possession immediately, so you'll need to find somewhere else to live when you get back." My mind raced through shock, confusion, and rage, but somehow my attorney training took over. Stay calm. Gather information. Don't react emotionally. "You sold our house?" Without discussing it with me. My voice remained steady despite the chaos inside me. "It's done, Amanda. The papers are signed. You can live on the streets for all I care." Something about his cruelty in that moment provided perfect clarity. This wasn't the man I married. This was someone I didn't know at all. And suddenly, I remembered exactly what he didn't know about our house. "All right," I said simply. "All right? That's all you have to say." He sounded disappointed, like he'd been anticipating a meltdown. "Yes. All right. I have to go now, Richard. Goodbye." I ended the call and set my phone down carefully. Then the emotional dam broke. I cried until my eyes swelled and my throat burned. 8 years of marriage ended in a 2-minute phone call. The betrayal was staggering, not just the affair, but the calculated cruelty of selling our home while I was away. After an hour of releasing raw emotion, I splashed cold water on my face and looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't defeated. She was angry and focused. I picked up my phone and called Marie, my longtime friend who worked at the Suffolk County Clerk's office. "Marie, it's Amanda. I need to confirm something about my property records right away." "Amanda? It's after midnight there. Are you okay?" "No, but I will be. I need you to check who actually owns my house according to county records." As Marie accessed the database, I held my breath. My entire plan hinged on what she would find. "Amanda, the property is owned by the Walker Reynolds Protection Trust, with you listed as the primary trustee and sole beneficiary. Richard has no individual claim to the property." I closed my eyes, relief washing over me. "And there's been no sale or transfer recorded recently?" "Absolutely not. Any sale would require your signature as trustee." "It's ironclad." "Thank you, Marie. You've just saved me." After ending the call, I booked an earlier flight home. Richard thought he had destroyed my life, but he had severely underestimated who he was dealing with. The house he thought he had sold wasn't his to sell. And I was going home to show him exactly what happens when you betray a woman who specializes in real estate law. 3 years ago, when we purchased our Victorian dream home, I insisted on structuring the ownership in a very specific way. My experience handling messy divorces and property disputes had taught me that even the most seemingly solid marriages could dissolve unexpectedly. It wasn't that I didn't trust Richard then, I did. But my professional instincts had been honed by witnessing too many worst-case scenarios. "We need to establish a property trust," I explained to Richard as we prepared to sign the mountain of paperwork for our new home. Richard rolled his eyes. "Is that really necessary? We're married. What's mine is yours and all that." "It protects both of us," I insisted. "And it has tax advantages." What I didn't fully explain was that the Walker Reynolds Protection Trust one had created named me as both the primary trustee and sole beneficiary. Richard would have limited authority to make decisions about the property without my explicit consent. Under the trust terms, any sale, refinancing, or significant alteration to the property required my signature as trustee. Richard barely skimmed the documents before signing them. "This legal stuff bores me to tears." "I trust you, Amanda. You're the expert." His casual dismissal of such important legal protections should have been a red flag. But at the time, I interpreted it as confidence in my professional skills. Now I understood it was simple arrogance. Richard never believed he needed to understand the details because he never imagined anyone outsmarting him. The trust wasn't my only protection. Over the past year, as Richard's behavior became increasingly suspicious, I had begun quietly investigating our finances. As a successful attorney, I had always maintained a separate savings account and retirement fund, but most of our day-to-day expenses came from joint accounts. What I discovered was alarming. Richard had accumulated nearly $80,000 in credit card debt that I knew nothing about. He had taken a personal loan against his 401k. And most concerning, he had unsuccessfully tried to refinance our home 6 months earlier, a transaction that failed because it required my signature as trustee. Each discovery led me to implement additional protective measures. I transferred my portion of our joint savings to my personal account. I removed his access to my credit cards. I documented every unusual expense and absent night, not because I was planning to end our marriage, but because my legal training had taught me to prepare for contingencies. I never confronted Richard about these discoveries. Some instinct told me to watch and wait, to understand the full scope of what was happening before showing my hand. That restraint now seemed prescient. During my flight home from Chicago, I pieced together what must have happened. Richard had found a buyer for our home, likely through private channels to avoid raising my suspicion. He had probably forged my signature on the sales documents or created some elaborate story about why I couldn't be present for the closing. Whatever method he used, the sale was completely invalid without proper execution by the trustee, me. The buyer would have paid earnest money, perhaps even the full purchase price, believing they had legitimately purchased our home. When they discovered the fraud, Richard would face not just divorce proceedings, but potential criminal charges for real estate fraud. I didn't feel satisfaction at this realization, only a profound sadness that the man I had loved was capable of such deception. But I also felt a steely resolve. Richard had tried to leave me homeless while I was working to advance my career. He had betrayed me in the cruelest way possible, and now he would face the consequences of underestimating me. As the plane began its descent into Boston, I prepared myself for the confrontation ahead. Richard expected to return to an empty house, perhaps with his mistress in tow, believing I would be scrambling to find temporary housing. Instead, he would find me calmly waiting in the home that legally belonged to me alone. I had texted my colleague Jackson before boarding, "Need your help with potential real estate fraud. Can you meet me at my house tomorrow with the trust documents?" Jackson had helped me create the trust initially and understood its legal implications perfectly. His response was immediate. "Absolutely. 10 a.m. work? Everything okay?" "It will be," I replied. The taxi ride from Logan Airport gave me time for final preparations. I had moved beyond tears into a state of focused determination. I would not scream or throw things. I would not give Richard the emotional meltdown he probably expected. I would simply present the facts and watch as his careful plan collapsed around him. As we pulled up to the Victorian house that had once represented our shared dreams, I noticed an unfamiliar car in the driveway alongside Richard's BMW. Jessica had apparently wasted no time moving in. Taking a deep breath, I paid the driver, grabbed my suitcase, and walked up the steps to my home, the home that Richard had no legal right to sell. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, I could hear Richard's voice from the kitchen, laughing at something. Female laughter joined his. They had no idea what was coming. I pushed open the heavy wooden door to my home, the familiar creak announcing my arrival. The laughter from the kitchen abruptly stopped. I set my suitcase down in the foyer, hung my coat on the antique hall tree, and calmly walked toward the kitchen as if returning from any ordinary business trip. Richard's face when he saw me was a study in shock. He stood frozen beside the marble island counter, a glass of my favorite red wine in his hand. Beside him stood a young woman I recognized from company photographs, Jessica, his assistant, now apparently his fiancée. She was pretty in a conventional way, at least 10 years younger than me, with highlighted blonde hair and an uncomfortable expression. "Amanda," Richard finally managed. "You're not supposed to be back until tomorrow." I finished early, I replied with practiced nonchalance. The deal closed successfully. "How nice to finally meet you, Jessica." Jessica's eyes darted between Richard and me. Nice to meet you too," she mumbled, clearly not having anticipated this scenario. I moved to the refrigerator and took out a bottle of water as if nothing were amiss. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Richard seemed to be recovering from his initial shock, his expression hardening. "Amanda, we need to talk," he said, his voice attempting authority. "Things have changed since we last spoke." "Yes, you mentioned that on the phone," I said, taking a deliberate sip of water. "You're leaving me for Jessica and you've sold our house. Congratulations on your engagement, by the way." Jessica shifted uncomfortably. "Richard, you said she already moved out," she whispered, Not quite quietly enough. I raised an eyebrow but maintained my composure. I see there's been some miscommunication. No, Jessica, I haven't moved out. In fact, I live here. Richard stepped forward, anger replacing his surprise. Not anymore. I've sold the house. The new owners take possession next week. You need to pack your things and leave. That's interesting, I replied, setting my water bottle down. I wasn't aware of any sale. I told you on the phone, Richard snapped. The paperwork is signed. It's done. I noticed several cardboard boxes in the living room beyond the kitchen. They had apparently already begun packing, or rather, Richard was packing my belongings while moving Jessica in. Why don't I check those documents? As a real estate attorney, I'd be very interested to see them, I said, my voice still calm. Richard's face flushed. You don't need to see anything. The house is sold. End of story. I walked past them to the living room, where I could see more boxes and some of Jessica's belongings already arranged on shelves that previously held my books and photographs. I turned slowly, surveying the changes they'd already made in my brief absence. You've been busy, I observed. Richard followed me, his patience visibly thinning. Amanda, you need to accept reality. Our marriage is over. This house is sold. You need to leave. I sat down on my sofa, and crossed my legs. I don't think I will. What do you mean you won't? Richard's voice rose. You don't have a choice. Something about his entitlement, his absolute certainty that he could discard me and our home so easily, triggered an unexpected reaction. I began to laugh. Not a small chuckle, but genuine, uncontrollable laughter that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me. Richard stared at me, confusion replacing anger. What's so funny? Have you lost your mind? I struggled to compose myself, wiping tears of laughter from my eyes. Oh, Richard, you really should have read those papers before you signed them. What papers? What are you talking about? Jessica had entered the living room now, standing awkwardly beside a half-filled box of my belongings. She looked increasingly uncomfortable, sensing that something was very wrong with Richard's plan. The papers for this house, I explained, my laughter subsiding into a controlled smile. The trust documents you signed 3 years ago when we purchased this property. Richard waved dismissively. Those don't matter anymore. I've sold the house. That's the funny part, I said, leaning forward. You can't sell what you don't own, Richard. His expression froze. What are you talking about? We're married. The house is in both our names. Actually, it isn't. The house belongs to the Walker Reynolds Protection Trust. I am the sole trustee and beneficiary of that trust. Your name appears nowhere on the deed, and you have no legal authority to sell this property. The color drained from Richard's face as the implications of my words sank in. Jessica's eyes widened. That's not possible, Richard sputtered. I signed the mortgage papers. You signed the mortgage as a co-borrower, yes. But the property itself is owned by the trust. Any sale would require my signature as trustee, my authentic signature, not a forgery. I emphasized the last words, watching Richard's reaction carefully. His slight flinch confirmed my suspicion. He had indeed forged my signature on the sales documents. Richard, Jessica said slowly, what is she talking about? You said the house was yours to sell. He lied to you, Jessica, I said simply. Just like he lied to me and to the unfortunate person who thinks they purchased this house. Richard's shock was quickly turning to rage. You tricked me. You never told me about any trust. It was all in the paperwork you were too important to read, I replied. The paperwork you dismissed as legal mumbo-jumbo, while you signed away your rights to this property. Richard lunged forward, his face contorted with anger. You calculating bitch. You planned this all along. Jessica gasped, stepping back from his outburst. I remained seated, refusing to be intimidated. I planned to protect my interests, I corrected him. And it's fortunate that I did, considering your current behavior. The tension in the room was palpable as Richard paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair in growing panic. Jessica stood frozen, clutching a framed photo she had been about to pack. "This can't be happening," Richard muttered. "The buyers have already paid the earnest money. The closing is scheduled for next week." "Those buyers have a significant problem then," I said calmly. "They've entered into a fraudulent real estate transaction. In fact, my law firm received a call from their attorney this morning, which is why I came home early." Richard stopped pacing and stared at me. "What?" "Their attorney contacted Harrington and Wells seeking clarification on the title. One of my colleagues recognized our address and notified me immediately. The buyers became suspicious when you couldn't produce the original deed showing your sole ownership." Jessica slowly set down the photo frame and turned to Richard. "You told me the house was in your name. You said your wife had no claim to it in the divorce. The divorce that hasn't even been filed yet," I added helpfully. Another detail Richard seems to have overlooked. Richard's face contorted with rage and desperation. "You've always done this, used your legal knowledge to manipulate situations. This house is as much mine as it is yours. I paid half the mortgage. Paying the mortgage doesn't grant ownership when the deed is held in trust," I explained as if to a child. "The mortgage is a debt obligation, not a title document. The trust owns the house, I control the trust, and you signed away any claim to it 3 years ago." Jessica sank into an armchair, the reality of the situation clearly dawning on her. "So the money from the house sale, the money you said would fund our new life together, doesn't exist," I finished for her. "And won't exist unless I agree to sell the house, which I have no intention of doing." Richard's desperation was escalating. He turned to Jessica with pleading eyes. "Baby, don't worry. We'll figure this out. Amanda's just trying to scare us." I stood up and walked to the antique secretary desk in the corner, unlocking the bottom drawer with a small key I kept on my keychain. I removed a folder containing the trust documents and held it up. "These aren't scare tactics, Richard. These are legal facts. The house cannot be sold without my consent as trustee. Any documents you signed purporting to sell this property are fraudulent, which is a criminal offense in Massachusetts." Richard lunged toward me, attempting to grab the folder. I stepped back quickly, keeping it out of his reach. "You don't want to add assault to fraud charges, Richard," I warned. Jessica stood up, gathering her purse. "I need some air." "This is not what you promised me, Richard." As she moved toward the door, Richard blocked her path. "Don't leave, Jess. She's bluffing. She's always been jealous of my success. She's trying to control me like she always has." I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of his claim. "Jealous? Of what exactly? Your hidden debt? Your deceptive behavior? Your willingness to commit fraud?" Jessica froze. "What debt? Richard, what is she talking about?" The doorbell rang, interrupting our standoff. Richard glanced nervously at the door. "That would be my colleague Jackson from the firm," I explained. I asked him to bring over some relevant documents regarding the trust and the attempted fraudulent sale. Without waiting for Richard's response, I walked to the door and opened it. Jackson stood on the porch, briefcase in hand, his expression professionally neutral despite the unusual circumstances. "Thank you for coming, Jackson," I said, leading him into the living room. "Of course, Amanda. I have everything you requested." He nodded politely to Richard and Jessica before placing his briefcase on the coffee table and retrieving several documents. "I've prepared a summary of the legal situation," Jackson explained, handing me a folder. "I've also drafted a cease and desist letter regarding the fraudulent sale attempt and contacted the buyer's attorney to clarify the ownership structure." Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "You had no right to interfere in my business transaction." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Walker, there was no legitimate business transaction. Attempting to sell property you don't own constitutes real estate fraud, which carries significant penalties." Jessica had edged toward the door again, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "Richard, you told me you owned this house. You told me the money from the sale would buy us a condo in Back Bay. There is no money, I said gently to Jessica. And there never was going to be. Richard has accumulated substantial debt over the past year. Did he mention that to you? Richard lunged forward again. Shut up, Amanda. You don't know what you're talking about. I've brought those financial records as well, Jackson interjected smoothly, removing another file from his briefcase. Credit card statements showing $82,347 in debt across 3 cards, a personal loan against his 401k for $45,000, and 2 rejected applications for home equity loans that failed because they required the trustee's signature. Jessica's expression shifted from confusion to dawning comprehension. Is this true, Richard? Are you in debt? Richard's desperation was palpable now. It's temporary. Just some investments that haven't paid off yet. Once we sell this house, which you can't do, I reminded him. I'll pay everything off and we'll start fresh, he finished, ignoring my interruption. Jessica shook her head slowly. You lied to me. About everything. She turned to me, unexpected sympathy in her eyes. Did you know about the debt? I discovered it recently, I admitted. Richard has been hiding financial problems for at least a year. I'm not the problem here. Richard shouted, his composure completely shattered. Amanda is trying to ruin everything. She's always been controlling, always questioning my decisions. Perhaps I should have questioned more, I replied calmly. Like why my husband was working so many late nights with his much younger assistant. Jessica flinched at the implied accusation, then straightened her shoulders. For what it's worth, the affair only started 3 months ago. He told me your marriage was already over and you were separated. Another lie. Richard had been creating a narrative that justified his behavior while making me the villain. Classic manipulation. Jessica, I said carefully, I don't blame you for Richard's choices. But you should know who you're really dealing with. I think I'm starting to see that, she replied, her voice hardening. She turned to Richard. You promised me a future built on lies. You made me complicit in your fraud. She picked up her purse and jacket. I deserve better than this. We're done. Jess, wait. Richard called desperately as she walked toward the door. Don't leave. I can fix this. But Jessica didn't look back as she walked out, the door closing firmly behind her. Left with nowhere to direct his rage, Richard turned on me. This is all your fault. You've ruined everything. Jackson stepped between us, his considerable height and build forming a protective barrier. Mr. Walker, I suggest you leave now before your situation worsens. Ms. Reynolds has legal ownership of this property, and you are currently trespassing. This is my house too, Richard shouted, his face contorted. Not according to Massachusetts law, Jackson replied calmly. The documentation is quite clear. If you refuse to leave voluntarily, we can involve the police and add trespassing charges to the potential fraud case. Richard looked from Jackson to me, seeming to realize the precariousness of his position. His shoulders slumped slightly, the fight visibly draining from him. Take your personal belongings and go, Richard, I said quietly. My attorney will contact you regarding divorce proceedings. For a moment, I thought he might lunge at me again. Instead, he grabbed his jacket and keys from the counter. This isn't over, he threatened, pointing at me. You think you're so clever with your legal tricks. You'll regret this. The only thing I regret, I replied evenly, is not recognizing your true character sooner. As Richard stormed out, slamming the door behind him, the house fell into sudden silence. I sank onto the sofa, the adrenaline that had kept me composed finally draining away. Jackson sat beside me, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. Are you all right, Amanda? I took a deep breath, surveying the half-packed boxes and disrupted living room that symbolized the chaos Richard had tried to create in my life. No, I admitted honestly. But I will be. The days following Richard's dramatic exit were surreal. I took a week off work to process what had happened and begin putting my life back in order. The first task was undoing the physical changes Richard and Jessica had started, unpacking my belongings and removing the few items Jessica had placed around the house. Each box I unpacked felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Books returned to their shelves, family photos resumed their places on the mantel, and my grandmother's quilt draped across the back of the sofa once again. I was erasing the evidence of betrayal one item at a time. My colleague Jackson helped me change the locks. Standard procedure in these situations, he explained as the locksmith worked. Given Richard's volatile reaction, it's better to be safe. The legal proceedings began almost immediately. The buyers who had attempted to purchase the house threatened to sue Richard for fraud, but Jackson negotiated a settlement where Richard returned their earnest money with interest. They were fortunate to discover the fraudulent nature of the sale before closing. Richard, meanwhile, had apparently moved in with a friend from his office. His initial threats of fighting for the house quickly evaporated when confronted with the irrefutable documentation of the trust. Instead, his attorney began arguing that Richard deserved half the value of the house in the divorce settlement. He has no legal basis for that claim, my divorce attorney Lisa assured me. The trust was properly established before the purchase. His contributions to the mortgage were essentially rent payments since he lived in a property owned by the trust. Richard's attempts to gain sympathy extended beyond legal channels. He began contacting our mutual friends, telling a distorted version of events where I had tricked him and thrown him out without warning. Some believed him initially. Richard had always been charming and persuasive. Marie was the first friend to call me. Richard reached out to me with this wild story about you hiding assets and tricking him, she said. I told him I've known you since law school, and that didn't sound like you at all. Thank you for that, I replied, grateful for her loyalty. Of course. But Amanda, you should know he's contacting everyone. Spinning quite the tale. Over the following weeks, more friends contacted me, each one reporting similar attempts by Richard to control the narrative. Some called to check on me, others to question Richard's version. A few even admitted they'd initially believed him until his story began showing inconsistencies. My parents flew in from Arizona, providing comfort and practical support as I navigated the emotional aftermath. My mother, ever practical, helped me organize the house while my father accompanied me to meetings with attorneys, providing silent support. I never fully trusted him, my mother admitted one evening as we sorted through kitchen cabinets, removing dishes Richard had purchased that I never liked anyway. He was always a little too smooth, a little too concerned with appearances. Why didn't you say anything? I asked, not accusingly but genuinely curious. Would you have listened? She countered gently. You were in love. Sometimes people have to discover truths in their own time. She was right, of course. The Richard I fell in love with had been carefully crafted to appeal to me, intelligent, ambitious, seemingly supportive of my career. The real Richard had revealed himself slowly, and even then, I had made excuses for his behavior until confronted with undeniable evidence. The divorce proceedings uncovered additional betrayals. During discovery, I learned that Richard had not only accumulated personal debt, but had also attempted to access my retirement accounts twice. Both attempts failed because they required signatures he couldn't forge, but the intention was clear. Financial records also revealed dinner and hotel charges in New York and Philadelphia on weekends when he claimed to be working locally, suggesting the affair with Jessica had started much earlier than she admitted. Each revelation hurt, but each also confirmed that ending the marriage was the right decision. The Richard I thought I knew had never really existed. Therapy became my sanctuary. Dr. Brennan, a divorce specialist recommended by Lisa, helped me process the complicated emotions of betrayal and loss. You're grieving multiple losses, she explained during one session. The loss of your marriage, the loss of the future you imagined, and the loss of trust in your own judgment. That last part hit particularly hard. As an attorney, I prided myself on being a good judge of character and situations. Richard's deception made me question that fundamental belief about myself. Does this mean I can't trust my instincts anymore? I asked Dr. Brennan. Not at all, she replied. It means you're human. We all have blind spots, especially with people we love. The question is what you learn from this experience. What I learned was to trust my professional instincts even in my personal life. The legal protections I had put in place saved me from Richard's attempt to leave me homeless. My caution about financial entanglements preserved my savings and retirement funds. Even my suspicions about his behavior, which I had initially dismissed, proved accurate. Work became another form of healing. I threw myself into new cases, finding satisfaction in helping clients protect their assets and interests. My managing partner noted my renewed focus and determination. The partnership committee has been watching your work, he mentioned casually after a successful client meeting. The Chicago deal was impressively handled, and your recent cases have shown exceptional attention to detail. We'll be making decisions in December. The potential of making partner, a goal I had been working toward for years, gave me something positive to focus on beyond the divorce. As summer turned to fall, I began reclaiming other aspects of my life. I redecorated the master bedroom, replacing the masculine gray tones Richard had insisted on with warm terracotta and cream colors that made the room feel like a sanctuary. I joined a weekend hiking group, rediscovering my love of the outdoors that had taken a back seat during my marriage. Most importantly, I reconnected with friends I had lost touch with during my marriage. Dinner with my law school study group revealed that several of them had drifted away because they found Richard condescending. Brunch with my cousin Sophia led to her confession that Richard had once made inappropriate comments when I wasn't present. Each revelation confirmed that others had seen what I had missed. By the time the leaves began to change, my home and life felt increasingly mine again. The divorce proceedings continued, but Richard's attempts to claim half the house value were repeatedly rejected by the court. His financial situation apparently worsened, as his attorney began pushing for a quick settlement. He's drowning in debt, Lisa informed me after a negotiation session. The credit card companies are suing, and he lost his job last month. He lost his job? What happened? Despite everything, I felt a twinge of concern. Apparently, he made some inappropriate advances toward another assistant after Jessica left. The company had received previous complaints that they'd overlooked, but this time they had no choice but to terminate him. The news didn't surprise me as much as it should have. Richard's pattern of behavior was becoming increasingly clear. He used people until they no longer served his purposes, then discarded them without remorse. The final surprise came during the holiday season. A beautiful arrangement of white roses arrived at my office with a card that simply read, "Thank you for showing me the truth. Jessica had sent flowers." The gesture was unexpected but oddly healing, an acknowledgement that we had both been deceived by the same man, albeit in different ways. As the year drew to a close, the divorce was finalized with terms heavily in my favor. Richard received none of the house value and was responsible for all debts in his name. The victory felt hollow in some ways. I had never wanted my marriage to end this way, but it also represented freedom from a relationship that had become toxic. The first holiday season alone in my home wasn't lonely as I had feared. My parents visited again, friends dropped by with food and wine, and my brother surprised me by flying in from Seattle with his family. Surrounded by genuine love and support, I realized how isolated I had become in my marriage without even recognizing it. On New Year's Eve, I stood in my garden, watching fireworks burst over Boston Harbor in the distance. The Victorian house behind me was truly mine now, in both legal and emotional terms. I had survived Richard's betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and surrounded by authentic relationships. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear, but for the first time in years, it was entirely mine to choose. 1 year after Richard's devastating phone call, I stood in my kitchen making coffee, marveling at how much had changed. The morning sunlight streamed through windows now adorned with stained glass panels I'd commissioned from a local artist. The kitchen itself had been renovated, replacing the sterile stainless steel appliances Richard had insisted on with warmer copper fixtures and a vintage-inspired range that better suited the Victorian architecture. The house had become a true reflection of my personality, rather than a showcase for impressing others. Each room told a story of recovery and rediscovery. The formal dining room that Richard had demanded we maintain for business dinners was now my home office, where I often worked on complex cases surrounded by law books and family photographs. The rarely used guest room had transformed into a reading sanctuary with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a window seat overlooking the garden. Professionally, the past year had exceeded my expectations. In December, I had been named the newest partner at Harrington and Wells, the first woman to make partner in 5 years. My specialty in protective real estate trusts had expanded, bringing new clients who sought exactly the kind of security that had saved me from Richard's scheme. Your personal experience makes you uniquely qualified, my managing partner had noted during my review. Clients trust your insight because you truly understand the stakes. He wasn't wrong. My practice had evolved to focus particularly on helping women secure their financial futures through strategic property ownership. I had even begun offering seminars on financial protection strategies for women's professional organizations, sharing my knowledge without revealing the personal details that had made it so essential. The divorce had been finalized months ago, with Richard receiving nothing from the house he had attempted to sell fraudulently. The last I heard, he had moved to Philadelphia for a lower-paying marketing position, his reputation in Boston's business community tarnished by the scandal of his attempted fraud and workplace misconduct. Jessica had eventually reached out again after sending the flowers. We met for coffee in a neutral cafe downtown, an awkward but ultimately healing conversation for both of us. "I wanted you to know that I really believed him when he said you were separated," she explained, stirring her latte nervously. By the time I realized the truth, I was already emotionally invested. "Richard is very convincing," I acknowledged. "He had me fooled for 8 years." Jessica smiled sadly. "The worst part is that I still miss him sometimes. The charming version of him, anyway." "I understand that completely," I admitted. "It's like grieving someone who never actually existed." That conversation had given me unexpected closure. Jessica wasn't the villain in my story. She was another casualty of Richard's manipulation. We weren't exactly friends, but the meeting had replaced bitterness with understanding. The most unexpected development in my year of healing came in the form of Daniel Mercer, the attorney who had represented the would-be buyers of my house. We had met during the settlement negotiations, where his intelligence and ethical approach to a difficult situation had impressed me. Months later, we crossed paths at a bar association event, and the professional admiration evolved into something more personal. Our relationship developed slowly and cautiously. I was wary of trusting again, and Daniel respected that boundary. Instead of grand romantic gestures, he showed consistency and transparency. When he said he would call, he called. When he shared details about his life or finances, they proved to be accurate. Simple reliability became the most attractive quality I could imagine. 6 months into dating, I finally felt ready to invite Daniel to my home for dinner. As he admired the architectural details and renovations, I found myself sharing the full story of Richard's betrayal and my narrow escape from homelessness. "I can't imagine the shock of that phone call," Daniel said as we sat in the garden with glasses of wine. "Finding out your husband was leaving you and had sold your house, all at once." "The strange part is that I'm almost grateful now," I admitted. "Not for the betrayal, but for the clarity it gave me. I might have spent many more years with a man who didn't truly respect me." Daniel reached for my hand. His loss, unquestionably. The simple gesture of support meant more than any passionate declaration. Daniel understood something that Richard never had, that true partnership requires genuine respect. As my personal life found new balance, I also reconnected with the parts of myself I had neglected during my marriage. I resumed piano lessons abandoned years earlier when Richard complained about the noise. I traveled solo to Italy, something Richard had always discouraged, claiming travel was only worthwhile when shared. I adopted a rescue dog named Bella, despite Richard's insistence that pets were too messy for our showcase home. Each small reclamation of my authentic self healed another wound inflicted during my marriage. I began to recognize the red flags I had ignored with Richard, his subtle criticism disguised as concern, his dismissal of my interests, his need to control our social circle. These realizations weren't just about understanding my past, they were protecting my future. My experience had taught me invaluable lessons that I now shared with friends, clients, and attendees at my seminars. Financial independence is non-negotiable, even in marriage. Maintaining separate accounts alongside joint finances isn't distrustful, it's prudent. Legal protections aren't just for clients. The professional expertise I use daily for others had saved me when applied to my own life. Trust your instincts about behavior patterns. The small inconsistencies I had noticed and dismissed were actually important warning signs. But the most profound lesson was about self-worth. I had accepted Richard's gradual erosion of my confidence because I had tied my value to making our marriage work. Now I understood that walking away from toxicity requires more strength than enduring it. On the anniversary of Richard's devastating phone call, I hosted a dinner party, something I would never have done while processing my grief. My parents, brother, close friends, and Daniel gathered around my dining room table, filling the house with genuine laughter and warmth. After dinner, as conversations broke into smaller groups, Marie pulled me aside in the kitchen. "I remember how you sounded on the phone that night," she said quietly, "when you called to check the property records. You were so focused on the legal details, but I could hear the pain underneath." I nodded, remembering the strange clarity that had come through my shock and grief. I needed those records to be what I thought they were. They were my only protection. And now look at you, Marie gestured around the beautifully renovated kitchen, at the sounds of laughter from the other room. You didn't just survive, Amanda. You flourished. She was right. Richard's betrayal, intended to destroy me, had instead forced me to rebuild on a stronger foundation. The house he tried to steal from me had transformed into a true home. The career he had sometimes subtly undermined now flourished with purpose and recognition. The confidence he had slowly eroded had returned stronger and more authentic. Later that evening, after guests had departed and Daniel had gone home with plans to return the next day, I stood alone in my bedroom. On the wall hung a small painting I had purchased during my solo trip to Italy, a sunrise over the Tuscan countryside. It represented the most valuable thing Richard's betrayal had inadvertently given me, a new beginning, entirely on my terms. I sometimes wondered if Richard ever realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. In attempting to leave me homeless and heartbroken, he had instead set me free. His cruelty had revealed his true character and, in doing so, released me from a marriage that had slowly been diminishing me. The Victorian house stood strong around me, its solid walls and beautiful architecture a testament to endurance and adaptation through time. Like the house, I had weathered a storm and emerged intact, restored, and improved. Richard's betrayal had been meant as an ending. Instead, it had become the beginning of a more authentic life than I had ever imagined possible. What about you? Have you ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal or loss? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our experiences helps others find their own path forward. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more journeys of resilience and renewal. And remember, sometimes what looks like your worst day can actually be the first day of your best life. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find strength in your own challenges.